voted 5-0 to approve case. Let's see the case number on here. So item 2.2. Voted to approve. That work? Yes. Approve settlement. All right. Very good. Moving on. Announcement of new protocols, and I will get nice and close to the microphone. So the Board of Trustees encourages public participation during the meeting and requests civility and the use of courteous language. The board does not condone the use of profanity, vulgar language, gestures, or other inappropriate behavior, including personal attacks or threats directed towards any meeting participant and or district employee. There will be an opportunity to speak to the Board of Trustees on items not on the agenda during the public comment, item 4.5, as well as opportunities to speak to each item on the agenda when that item comes up for consideration. In the interest of facilitating the conduct of the public's business, members of the public who wish to address the board during the meeting will have specific time limits as follows. If less than 10 members of the public wish to comment on agenda or non-agenda items, the time limit for each public comment will be 3 minutes per person. If 10 or more members of the public wish to comment on agenda or non-agenda items, the time limit for each public comment will be 1.5 minutes. A complaint about a specific employee or employees of the district should be made to that employee's immediate supervisor or the school site principal as outlined in our board policy and administrative regulation. Please complete the comment form located on the side table in the back of the room, and we will call you when it is your turn to speak. This meeting is being audio and video recorded and will be archived. All right, moving on to item 5.1, board expectations, and Trustee Constant is going to read those for us tonight.
Thank you. Our board expectations are that we will prepare all students for life, college, and career. We do that with high quality academic opportunities for all students and supporting student academics success. Engage in partnership with families and the community. The schools are a welcoming, safe environment that serves as the center of student learning, activities, athletics, and performing arts, and promote a sense of community in our school and the surrounding areas. We utilize effective governance and business practices by remaining open, transparent, and accountable to the community, and serving as an employer of choice with the highest quality teachers and staff.
All right, and then board reports. I've been having you go first. Do you want me to switch it up? You want to just keep going?
I have nothing to report.
Well, that is easy.
Okay, so mine is this morning, along with Trustee Hall, we visited Wood Creek High School as part of the Placer County Elections Office Voter Outreach Program, which is really fun. Some of you, I think, want to see that this morning. So, okay, good, yay. Good, so I was there for 2 sessions of about 110 kids, and I really appreciated the thoughtful questions that the students asked. They asked about minimum wage, homelessness, water management in California, the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, gas prices, defunding the police, forest management in California, and Elon Musk's involvement in the new Trump administration. So there was a lot. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of our students, and I'm glad that you're here tonight. And I just really emphasize that it's vitally important to the health of our communities and our nation that you as students are civically educated and civically aware. So I go out, register, be sure to vote, and stay involved and come to more of these board meetings than just for your assignment tonight.
Right. I will echo all of what she just said. It's one of my favorite things to do. I was in the afternoon session at Wood Creek High, and I really wish that it was something my high school would have had way back in 1994. But it was great. The kids have just really thoughtful questions. You can tell that they are aware and paying attention to the world, and so it was very rewarding. It's one of my favorite things. Then yesterday I had a great visit at Oakmont High with Mr. Buljan, and I guess I'm going to reference 1994 again, because when sheds and all kinds of things. So it was always very impressive. I always feel like I'm on a college campus, all of the things that our students have access to. We stopped into the media class where they were doing, well, what I call a mock rock. I'm really aging myself. But they were doing a lip sync to a movie clip that they were preparing for today. So they did a very impromptu rehearsal for me, which was awesome. We stopped by AP Site and an EDL class, and then I have my calendar marked for March 14th, Mr. Buljan, for that cake decorating judging, which is the midterm for the culinary class. They're doing cake decorating. I know, I got that. So it was a great visit. I love Oakmont High, and thank you for taking me around.
So Heidi, before you go on, you referenced feeling old twice.
Yeah.
Just to make you feel young. Me and at least one other person in this room, which I won't point out, we just kind of sit in that direction. We went to school in the 60s and 70s. So you can feel a little younger now.
Okay, I am, I do have a birthday next week, and so I think it's the next week. But that makes me feel a little better.
I've never heard the reference mock rock. Before break, I was able to get over to Oakmont and appreciate the time with Mark Buljan, and I spent most of my time with Kim Carroll, who runs their IB program, which she invited the board probably a month ago, and I took her up on the offer to tour all the classes, so I really appreciated that time. Thank you.
All right, so I hopefully everyone all the students had a nice break. I know administrators is probably catch-up time when the students are away, but hopefully everyone had a good time. Breather before midterms are coming before long here. I just wanted to give a shout out. I saw an announcement from the State Department of Education announcing 2025 model continuation high schools. And really amazing, Adelante High School is the only one recognized in Placer County. So shout out, congrats to the whole team there. Principal Fernandez, who's with Adelante and Independent High School, the whole staff done a lot of great things. And as you know, our comprehensive continuation high schools are so important for a lot of our students and helping them achieve and get to where they need to be and contribute to society. And so we're doing some great things. So I just want to say congrats to that school. And nothing else to report, but just say, hey, we'll see you next time.
All right, thank you. So we do have a new student board member tonight, and I believe that we're going to introduce her first, right? All right, thank you.
Members of the Board of Education, it is my honor to introduce to you Allison King, our student board member for Roseville High School. Allison is our current ASB president and has been a part of student government since her freshman year, showing exceptional leadership and dedication, especially in our student spirit section, which she leads. And if you have not had the honor of seeing our tiger cage, you should, because they are absolutely fantastic. Allison is well respected by her peers and works hard to create an inclusive and positive school environment. She also dedicates her time outside of school to working at a daycare and spending time with friends and family. So I reached out to her teachers and asked them to share just a little bit about Allison, and these are some quotes of what her teachers had to say about her. They say that Allison is an excellent leader through and through. She has a commitment to do things well. Allison knows how to lead a group of her peers in a confident yet inviting manner. She is determined and open to constructive criticism, and she shows a level of maturity that serves her well. Allison plans to attend a 4-year university to study pre-law after graduation. So I'm very excited that Allison is going to bring her insights here to the board as Roseville High's student board representative.
Okay, so this time, ladies, for you to give your reports. Whoever wants to go first.
Mike's ready.
Well, thank you for that, Miss Saren. So we just got back from ski week last week, and we have midterms coming up. Over the last month, we have had this event called Roseville Bound, where all the incoming freshmen that are coming next year came to the school to pick their classes, and as student government, we showed up and we welcomed them and showed them some school spirit. We also recently put on a blood drive, and our sign-ups filled out within 2 days. We were completely full. We already had 60 people signed up. We also have our boys and girls soccer team having their first playoff game this Wednesday. It's home. They both made it to playoffs. We also, our competitive cheer team just won first place at JAMS Nationals, and our robotics team also placed first in their last competition. We found out today that Roseville got the most scholarships out of any other school in the district, so we're pretty happy about that. We have the crab feed this Saturday that our junior class president is putting on, and we're going to help raise money for junior prom, which is also coming up next month. We also had Casaba last month, which is our winter dance, and a Casaba basketball game to follow that, which all ran smoothly.
Good evening. I'm Allison, ASB President and Student Board Representative for Granite Bay. We have just gotten back from ski break, as Allison said, and our students are preparing for our SATs and midterms this month, as well as our juniors are going to be doing CAPS testing and attending their prom this month as well. Our school also successfully put on a fundraising donation drive for Palisades High School, a school that was unfortunately affected by the LA fires. 40% of their school was affected, and we were able to raise funds and give it to them in any way they need to use to recover. And our annual Powder Puff is starting with meetings and practices this month. Everyone participating is so excited to start the Powder Puff process. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have superintendent. Any communications received?
Yeah, no communications have been received. Just wanted to give a couple updates because this past week and now into this week, we have all of our winter sports in the playoffs right now. So we have a lot going on. In basketball, Wood Creek boys are in the Division II semifinals. It's actually tip off in about 5 minutes at Rockland. So that's a big game for them. In soccer, West Park girls are in the Division II semifinals tomorrow night at Rockland. Granite Bay girls in the Division II semifinals tomorrow night at home. And then, like you heard from Allison, Roseville girls are in the Division III semifinal tomorrow night at home. Wood Creek boys, Division II semifinal tomorrow night, hosting Downey at Modesto. And then Roseville boys are in the Division III semifinal. So if you want to watch boys and girls soccer at Roseville High School, they have 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Both of them are hosting, so we have a lot going on there. Then we have 2 boys from Granite Bay, Carson and Levi, in the state wrestling championships down in Bakersfield. So a lot going on in the area of athletics for our schools in terms of the playoffs, and all these teams in the semis, most of them will also qualify for the NorCal and state tournament, which follows here in a couple weeks. So busy time going on there. And then we had the recent passing of a former superintendent here, Bob Tomasini. I'm going to have Brad just kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yes, retired Roseville Joint Union High School District Superintendent Bob Tomasini passed away on Saturday at the age of 87. Just like to take a moment to recognize and honor his 41 years of service and education as a teacher, a coach, a principal, and a superintendent. Bob started his career teaching at Fortuna High School, which was his alma mater, where he taught Spanish and coached baseball and basketball. He later served as a principal, assistant superintendent, and superintendent during his 21-year tenure with River Delta Unified School District before becoming Roseville Joint Superintendent in 1989. We experienced extraordinary change and tremendous growth under Bob's leadership. He was instrumental in securing the support for much-needed school bond measures. He challenged us to incorporate systems thinking as we struggled with rapid change and rapid growth in the city of Roseville and in the school district. And he led staff in opening Wood Creek and Granite Bay High Schools. Bob was elected to the Sierra College Board of Trustees after he retired from Roseville Joint in 2000, and then elected to the Placer County Office of Education's Board of Trustees in 2006, and he served there for 16 years before stepping down in 2022. Outside of education, Bob was dedicated to his faith, was a Rotarian for 50 years and donated hundreds of hours serving and supporting the unhoused at the Gathering Inn. He was a true servant leader. Bob was a great superintendent and community leader who was intelligent and direct. We never wanted to get that side of him, but sometimes he did. But yet he was compassionate with an unwavering commitment to our students, this district, and this community. Bob is survived by his wife of 65 years, Sheila Tomasini, has 6 children, 18 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren. He led a purposeful life and made a tremendous impact on his community. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Brad. Thank you. Nothing more.
Okay. Next up, committee reports. Having first policy tomorrow. We do have a committee tomorrow, but nothing to report out tonight. And then next up is the RSEA report. I can't call it the anatomy report anymore.
No. It's not the anatomy report. It will in May, first, Brandon report, I guess, because I'm the vice president. See, this is my first time in this place. Oh. Very fancy. I love that you guys are raised. It wasn't sitting down all the time. So I am going to be the president of RSA come May 1st. Our system is set up so that you elect the vice president, we call it president-elect, and they serve for 2 years to kind of just get the feel of things, and then you roll into that job. So you're going to be stuck with me for 2 years. Hopefully that will be a great experience, and I've been president of the RSA a handful of times, because even though I'm vice president, unlike our current vice president, J.D. Vance, who was 5 when I started teaching, Heidi, just so you don't feel quite so bad, I've been president more than a handful of times in this, so I've been around the block. Pete and I had a great time talking way before, and we went through a whole bunch of things. Marla's kid is one of the best I've ever had, so we've got some people, but one of the things I've always tried to do in my role is to get to know the actual board members as quick as I can. So we'll be going out to coffee or whiskey, no anyways, we'll go out someplace to just get to know each other. And a chance, because I think more than anything else, I've always firmly believed, and it's proven out to be true almost every time I had it tested, that we're all trying to do the best for our kids. We might disagree on exactly how to get there, but when we don't talk to each other, that's when we start thinking other people are trying to conspire against us. And that's when I want to make sure that we do. So I will try to be getting connected with each of you pretty soon. I don't want to do it while Natalie's still president, because I don't want to make her feel like I'm undermining her or anything like that. But anyways, I look forward to getting to know everybody. Even I had a Zoom meeting back in the COVID days. We really couldn't do anything other than that. But anyways, I'm looking forward to that. Other than that, we don't have anything other than we'll be doing negotiating pretty soon. Brad will be retiring soon, so I think we're going to be asking for at least a $25,000 bonus for the human resources, but we can negotiate that. Anyways, thanks.
Right. Okay, public comment. Do we have any? No public comment. This is your chance to ask directly. Okay. What's that? Extra credit. No public comment tonight. That's rare. Okay, we're moving on to the consent agenda. 6.1. Any questions?
Make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
And roll call vote on that one. So Keith, Constance,
Yep.
Yes.
Heidi, yes.
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 Board members? Yes. Okay, so we are approved 5-0 on our consent agenda. And then we will go to action matters. So item 7.1, I believe we'll have Mr. Basham to present.
Yes, the purpose of this item is to eliminate and reduce 4 classified positions due to a lack of work or a lack of funds for next school year. Due to budgetary considerations for the 25-26 school year, classified employee services should be reduced. Due to a lack of work or a lack of funds, it is necessary for the district to eliminate the following position due to a lack of funds. 1 FTE, an 8-hour position for an educationally related mental health specialist, also known as an ERMS. It's also necessary for the district to eliminate the following positions due to a lack of work. 1 FTE, 8-hour position for a mental health associate, as well as a 0.4 FTE, a 3.2-hour position for occupational therapist. And it's also necessary for the district to reduce the following position due to a lack of work. one cafeteria assistant from a 4-hour per day position to a 3.5-hour per day position. The layoff process is governed by the district's bargaining agreement with CSEA and through Education Code regulations, and staff recommends that Resolution 2503 be adopted, reducing one cafeteria assistant, one position, and eliminating one ERMS position, one occupational therapist position, and one mental health associate position effective June 30th of 2025. Willing to take questions.
So Brad, just to clarify, the first 3 positions, they were vacant, correct?
Yes, the first 3 were vacant. The ERMS position was originally a grant-funded position. We've used most of that money. We still have other ERMS in the district, and they're able to meet the needs of our students with special, or with exceptional needs that have mental health services written into their IEP. The mental health associate position has been vacant this year as well. That's a position we used to have one at Independence and one at Adelante. Now that those 2 schools have merged as pathways, we're able to service all of the students and meet their needs with one mental health associate. We tried to find an occupational therapist. No one stepped up for that part-time work. We contract services as needed, and so the need actually fluctuates, so it didn't make sense to continue that. And the cafeteria position, we had someone go out on a leave of absence. Someone stepped up. They increased their hours. By ed code, once you work more than 20 days in that position with those new hours, that becomes your new hourly rate. And so she'll remain in that position through the end of the school year, but then next year go back to the original hour amount that she was originally hired for, because we no longer have a need for her to work the extra half hour per day.
Questions?
Motion approved.
I'll second.
It's a resolution.
Okay, so resolution, we have a roll call vote. Yep, you were raised to that second. Good. All right, trustee Constant.
Yep.
And
Yes.
Heidi is yes.
Yes.
Will.
Yes.
Board members, yes. Okay, we are unanimous, 5-0 on 721. We are moving along. So now we have our big discussion, 7.2, which was kind of a continuation from last meeting, and will be an ongoing topic, but we're going to get started with Mr. Hamden.
Alrighty, here we go. I'm going to get us started here with this presentation. Just to orient the board a little bit, we're talking about the SFID, which is the School Facility Improvement District. It's essentially a carve-out of our entire district that's used for bond purposes. And in this case, the SFID, or we're talking about it here in the packet, Measure A, is the West Park boundaries. And so that's where I put the school boundaries up there. The top left corner, that dark blue area, that's where West Park attendance boundaries currently are. Everybody in that dark blue area is part of the SFID. And so I wanted to, so when we're talking about the SFID, the taxation in the SFID, that's going to be just in that area alone. A little later in the presentation, we're going to talk about the district-wide bonds. That includes everybody in the district, including the SFID. So everybody in the SFID pays district-wide bonds as well as separate bonds, and then everybody else only does the district-wide bonds. So I'm going to get us started to give you a little bit of a kind of history of where we've come with the SFID. So in 2007, the SFID was passed, and the bond authorization was for $115 million. So the voters out in the SFID voted and allowed the district to issue $115 million in bonds. Now, as we're going to talk a little bit, there's certain assessed values that are needed to be able to sell those bonds. And so over time, you see 4 issuances there, beginning in 2011. So in 2011, we issued $4.8 million in change. That was used to help purchase the land, back when we needed the land to be able to build the high school. And then you see Series B, C, and D. Those were used to help get West Park started, the first phase and the second phase. So you add all that money up, that's about $65 million of that $115 million authorization. So when you take those bonds, we've already spent that money on West Park and the buildings. we have $50.98, or just about $51 million in authorization available. And we're gonna go over kind of the details of what we can potentially consider as a district in regards to accessing some of those funds. So a key factor in looking at the SFID is you have to look at the assessed valuation. So the assessed value back, in 2007 was much smaller than it is now. There weren't many homes back then. So when you look at 2009, the total assessed value of all the buildings, all the land out there is $579 billion. And you can see over the last 20 years, or I guess that's 16 years, has grown quite a bit. You can see the average per year since 2009 to the left, as well as each individual year. We had one bad year in 2011 where there was some recession, some slowdown. But besides that, and 2013 was a little low, we've been in double-digit growth, at least 10% every year. Most recent year, 2025, it's been slowing down a little bit. We only had about 11.76% growth. But as you look through each year, it can kind of fluctuate as houses get built, there's more demand. But we've continued to see quite a bit of demand, as the board knows, out in West Park, with people moving from the Bay Area, people buying their first homes, all kinds of things out there. So as of right now, we have about $5.8 trillion in assessed value, and that's what we use to determine how much bonding we could potentially use. Now, when we passed the bond back in 2007, it wasn't a promise or a guarantee, it was an estimate of how much tax rate the average homeowner would pay. And so when we did that, we estimated that over the life that the homeowners would be paying $38.69 per $100,000 in assessed value. So the way I like to think of it is $1 million home, that would be $386.90. So that's how much you would pay each year, is what we estimated that they would pay. Now, when you look at 2018-19, the most recent tax history, we've been able to stay below that. So that's been kind of a guide for us as a district. We've been trying to, there's nothing horrible that's gonna happen to us if we go above $38 and we charge $39 or $40. It's just more of trying to stay true to what we estimated for the taxpayers. So over the last 5-6 years, we've been well below $38. And even in those first years, well, before 2011, there was no payments until we issued those bonds. So we're gonna go over some scenarios. I'm actually gonna bring out Chris Hyatt from Keygen, who's our financial advisor we work with. She's expert and does this for all kinds of districts and helps selling bonds. So she's gonna go over some different scenarios and options, and then I'm gonna finish up and go from there.
Good evening. It's good to see you all again. It's been a few years since I've been in front of the school board, so happy to be here tonight to talk about Measure A. So as it was mentioned, we were looking at potentially issuing more bonds from Measure A, which is what we'll be discussing. So first we have to look at what are the current projected tax rates for the existing bonds that Joe just walked through. We are currently projected to remain below the 3869 limit, or estimate, until the year 2046. However, that is dependent on what kind of growth we see in future years. So if we see a lot of growth, a lot of new homes being developed, more significant assessed valuation growth, that will mean that the old bonds will cost less and you'll have more capacity to sell more Measure A bonds in the future. If, however, assessed valuation growth is assumed to remain fairly low, there would be less capacity to sell new bonds. And then after 2046, when all of the old bonds have matured, there is significant capacity. We have all $38 for which we could issue new bonds. One other item we have to keep under consideration is the district's bonding capacity, and that is a statutory limit on the amount of bond that can be outstanding at any given point. The state has a calculation for this. It is done by taking the total assessed valuation for the SFID, the SFID, of $5.8 billion, which Joe covered on the earlier slide, and multiplying that by 1.25%. Did I do that? We lost our presentation up here. I'll continue though. Multiplied by 1.25%. That is the limit for all non-unified school districts in the state of California. Back in 2018, however, the district did ask the State Board of Education for a waiver to increase that limit factor to 2.86%. That waiver was granted, and you can see the limitations on the bottom that the State Board of Education imposed. two of which are very relevant for us today. The first is that waiver expires at the end of 2025. And the second is that they expected the district to maintain that $38.69 tax rate estimate that was estimated to voters. So to the extent you were to sell new bonds this year, we would need to comply with the $38 limit, or be able to show bond council that we project to remain below that number. And we'd also need to sell bonds this year. However, if you were to not sell bonds this year, you would be able to reapply for a new waiver. Those are routinely granted. In fact, I just submitted waivers for 2 other school districts last month. So that is something that does occur. Before we talk about what kind of bonds could be sold under Measure A, I wanted to give a quick explanation of the 2 different types of bonds that school districts can issue. The first is current interest bonds. Those are the kind of plain vanilla, most commonly issued bonds by California schools. Those pay interest on a semi-annual basis, twice a year, usually August and February, and then pay principal at maturity when the bonds come due. The other type are called capital appreciation bonds. Those compound interest semi-annually instead of paying it. And both the interest and the principal is due at maturity. And you can see an illustration on the bottom of how those work. The reason you would issue capital appreciation bonds is whenever there's limited tax rate capacity. So because you already have sold a lot of your Measure A bonds and we're kind of near that $38.69 limit, we may need to use some amount of capital appreciation bonds in order to be able to sell bonds today and repay them later. So you'll see on the next slide, depending on how much you would want to issue from Measure A, we would need to use an increasing amount of capital appreciation bonds. All right, so on slide 8, we have a summary of 5 different scenarios to issue new bonds under Measure A. As I mentioned earlier, we do need to be able to maintain that $38.69 tax rate estimate that was promised to voters. So all of these scenarios do just that. I'll talk first about scenario 1, which issues about $16 million in the general obligation bonds. In order to do so, we have to be able to assume that the tax base will grow at 10% per year for the next 5 years and then 6% annually thereafter. As you saw in an earlier slide, your historical averages since 2009 have been well above that, so this could be considered the most conservative of the 5 scenarios. With that, the estimated total cost for that $16 million would be about $47.5 million, which is a ratio of just under 3 to 1. Under state law, we have to be under a 4 to 1 retainer ratio, so all 5 of these scenarios comply with that. And lastly, that would require 90% capital appreciation bonds, 10% current interest. And scenarios 2 through 5 are increasingly issuing more bonds. So I'll skip to scenario 5 to show you the bookends. Scenario 5 issues all of the remaining Measure A, so about just about 51 million. For that scenario, we need to assume 15% tax base growth over the next 6 years and then 6% annually thereafter. And again, similar estimates of cost and capital appreciation bonds are on the website. Scenarios 2 through 4 are in between scenarios, which are what it takes to be able to issue those amounts, 20 million, 30 million. In addition to the SFID tax rates that the taxpayers are already paying, we do have 3 other prior bond measures that taxpayers are still paying on for district-wide bonds. Those were approved in 1991, 2004, and 2016. You can see what those look like on the bottom, where the 1991 bonds are due to roll off in 2026. The 2004 bonds will mature in 2031, and 2016 go all the way out to 2025. In total this year, for the 24-25 fiscal year, that tax rate is $16.15. So SFID taxpayers pay $31 and the $16 they would pay both. In terms of how you compare to other districts in the county of Placer, we have a chart here to show you that. So this tries to combine both the elementary and the high school. That's why you see Roseville's highlighted in 4 different spots, depending on which elementary school district you're looking at. But this does generally show that your tax rates are fairly low for the county. And similar analysis within Sacramento County, when we combine Dry Creek, which is within the Sacramento area, you're definitely on the low end in Sacramento County compared to some of the other surrounding districts. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Chris. And Chris back to in case you have questions that are too confusing for me, and then she can help answer those. But I wanted to bring it back to a little bit of kind of some scenarios for the district to consider. We've got two big projects that are really kind of that important and what we're considering, and I wanted to give, these are just ranges and ideas to consider and wanted to talk about, so you can kind of have that thinking as we look at what type of bonds we want to pursue. We have a big need at West Park High School, as we talked about, just the growth and the potential out there. We have a need for a theater / multi-purpose building. I know Becky, the principal there, has talked about a lot of the issues of not having a multi-purpose area we can bring in a class, only able to use the gym. So it goes beyond just visual and performing arts, but just a lot of needs for a theater there, as well as classroom buildings. And there's a number of ways that can be done. We can have another 3-story classroom building and a theater. That was probably traditionally thought is what we would do. We could also have a building that kind of combines both of those. We can go really much more expensive and build a theater and portables, which would be a lot less expensive than the monies I'm showing here. But just wanted to kind of give an idea of theater. We just built Antelope's Theater not too long ago. West Park, we would anticipate probably a bigger theater, a bigger class. So we want to be able to fit more students. So I'm estimating somewhere around that, probably $30–40 million. Depending on what we do, we may have some ancillary classroom buildings attached to that theater. And as we do a classroom building, a 3-story building like we have, we'd be around that $20–30 million. So just to give you an idea of what we'd be looking at money-wise, depending on what we decide. Over at Oakmont High School. Now, what we're talking about, the SBID is not money for Oakmont High School, but it's part of the pot. The more money we have out of the SBID to complete West Park, the more money that frees up for developer fees and other sources that can be used towards Oakmont. So even though it's not the same money, it kind of relates to what we can build at Oakmont. Oakmont, one of the top priorities we have is a swimming pool, something we've been promising and talking about. The pool is also on its last legs with the heater and everything not functioning. And so for me and for cabinet, that's a pretty high priority, is we need to get a new pool there. We built pools pretty recently, so that's right around $10 million. We built a very similar pool to what we just did at Granite Bay and Roseville High School. So we kind of know what we're doing there, but we want to work with an architect to determine kind of a master plan of what we're going to do at Oakmont, because we have a need for some new classroom building we've talked about, removing portables. We also have a lot of other needs, that's why I did /other. So there's a lot of things I know the principal and staff at Oakmont we would like to pursue, as far as updating that campus and doing some things there. So a lot of that will depend on our budget and prioritization. So depending on what decision, what direction we go, that'll determine what we're going to want to do. Just turn it off, huh? Okay. All right, so considering those numbers, I put together 4 scenarios. And these are just estimates, just me playing with numbers as far as if the board authorizes this is what it could look like in my multi-year capital improvement plan. Obviously, this could change quite a bit, but I did a scenario where the board says, okay, we don't want to do any estimate money, just work with what you got, Joe, and see what you can put together. So I said, okay, what can I do at West Park, and what can I do at, yeah, it looks like I need another one. So under this scenario, I plugged in, I wanted to get that $10 million for Oakmont in the beginning to get their pool done. And I put in $30 million I could fit for West Park growth. $30 million that can maybe build just a theater, or theater and a few classrooms or something like that. So not as much as I would like, but I could potentially do something there. And then Oakmont, the future project, that additional 20 you see down, we're having to wait a little longer before we do anything else at Oakmont. So we kind of have to do a phased approach at Oakmont. Let's get the pool, design the rest, and then a couple years later, as the money comes in, we'd be looking at the rest of some of the Oakmont work. I went through a scenario 2, which was $15 million, kind of like that initial scenario that Chris put out there, $16 million, so roughly around the same. And there I looked like I could put in a little bit more towards West Park and get Oakmont done maybe a little bit earlier. So that's just an example of, you can see down the bottom, I put $45 million for West Park, $30 million for Oakmont. I did scenario 3, $25 million. Then I have a lot more money. I put more for West Park, more for Oakmont, being able to get that project done sooner. And then the last scenario I just put together is what if the board said, okay, let's do the full 51 million. The board's comfortable with that. Then I have a lot more capacity. I can get West Park fully done. We go through design and figure out what we want to do there. But we have plenty of money to get West Park done, and I would also be able to, I put $50 million for Oakmont, and that still fit in with my multi-year capital improvement plan. So I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of what those different scenarios could look like. Obviously, whatever direction the board gives me as far as bond authorization, that would still come back to the board, because that would be Chris and I still working out the numbers and working out what we could sell bonds for, what interest rates. And then we'd also be coming back to the board for authorization to go out and design and get budget ideas for these two projects. So this was just to kind of give you a perspective. So I think that's all the information I had so far. I know I've talked to some board members about questions, so happy to answer questions.
All right. Get all the questions. I'm really looking at this.
I mean, like, questions first. Okay. Well, I'll start off with just a few things that I asked you and I got the answer for. I did ask about Classroom 1, which we talked about 2 weeks ago, the undeveloped area, which currently is drawn for West Park. If I recall, you estimated about 500 students would likely come from that area, right? And so I asked you if it was possible to, well, if we took that area out of an estimate, we talked about just, well, I won't rehash what we already talked about. If we took it out, what ramifications would we have? And could we take it out? Can we take it out with just anything in the future and make them pay for what we, best intentions we thought they were going to be part of West Park? So all the things. Do you want to answer that?
Sure. So the SBID, and it's a complicated thing, and the code and the law is not 100% clear. I have reached out to bond counsel, and when I asked, can they be removed from the SBID, there was about a 2-page email, not a yes or no, it's probably, I think is the answer. There's some steps you have to go through to have to get approval through CDE, but believe we probably could remove a section from the SBID, but they would be completely out. There's no staying partially in or not, so you're either in or you're out. So as of today, they're in the SBID, they'd be paying their share. Right now, there aren't any homes out there, but once there are, they'd be paying their proportionate share of the bond payments. So if they were to be removed, then they would stop paying those bond payments. And that does have an adverse effect on the homes that are currently out there, because there's less to share the bond payments with. So we, right now, in the projections, Chris is already with the selling of existing bonds, assume some growth that is from Placer 1. So if those were no longer included in the growth, that's going to limit the amount of growth to a degree. There's still plenty of growth outside of Placer 1. You know, we've got the projects up to the northwest, Creek View, Sierra Vista. There's still houses being sold, values are still going up, so it wouldn't take all of the growth, but it would have an impact. And that's where their question is, even with going through CDE, they may have concerns about the impact to existing homeowners. But
Okay, and I won't quote you on this, but your estimate that we were just chatting right before the meeting was a few dollars.
yeah, and at the early stages, it would be very minimal, right? If you only built 100 homes, that's gonna be pennies. But over 10 years, when the Placer 1's fully developed, it would be, up to, $5 or so, But as you saw in the beginning, and I think I said trillion, I meant billion, $5.8 billion currently. And so it takes a while to build that much value. So it would be a while before it would have a significant impact.
I just wanted all that answered when we talked about that.
Yeah. No, it's an important part of it.
Just to follow up on that, so what you're saying is if we were able to take Placer 1 out, you don't quite have the answer yet as to would there still be enough growth in the west, that area to keep the SFID at a reasonable amount? And you don't know that yet, or you could?
There's enough growth to limit it, but it's kind of, it depends on a lot of factors, the entire growth of the whole area, how much we sell, like whether we sell the full 51 or 0, that has an impact. So there's a lot of factors, but it would have an impact. I don't believe it would be a significant impact.
I've got lots of questions. I just usually take a long time, so I wanted to give other people a chance. Okay. So I guess, are we working the plan that was originally intended for the Measure A? So has anything changed from the original intention? Is this exactly what the plan was all along? Are we right there?
I think so. I mean, if you think about it, we've built most of West Park, but the key point, and I maybe mentioned earlier, is the funds from the SFID can only be spent on West Park. So we've got an additional $51 million that can be used to finish West Park. Once that West Park is done, I guess you could come back later and do other future improvements, but that money cannot be spent on another school. We did have to wait a while. I mean, I would have liked to have gotten more money earlier, but you were limited as those bonding capacity assessed value. It's a unique situation because, 20 years ago, there was next to no value, and now it's grown quite a bit. And so you need that assessed value to support the bond issuances. So it's come to plan. We've been able to issue funds, which have helped us build the school on time and meet the needs of the second phase. And now we're kind of at that next phase of we have additional growth. We need more money to help finish the school. So I think it's kind of come as planned.
And then, I guess similar, if we build the additional classrooms at West Park with the SFID money, and maybe this is not for tonight, but just thinking, will everybody who pays the SFID be able to go to West Park High School? So that's just a concern that I have, and I don't know that you can answer that necessarily tonight. But
Currently, the entire attendance boundary for West Park includes the SFID. So the only thing.
But all those students wouldn't be able to fit at West Park as is, or even with one new classroom building.
Correct, yeah. If we go out to the demographic projections and we're at 4,000 students, which we are unable to house, then they would not. Now, I would say that even with Measure D and historically with prior bonds, everybody ends up paying and kind of sharing in, right? So with Measure D was passed in 2016, $30 million of Measure D was used to help get West Park built because we didn't have the SFID authorization. So there is a sharing of the costs across, even if it's not a school you're going towards. But this is a little unique, is that the people who live in the SFID are actually taxed higher than everybody else. So there is a scenario where if the board makes a decision to remove, for instance, Placer 1, then they would be paying the additional SFID and not going to, or if they change the attendance boundary to have them go to another school, they could be paying into the SFID and not attending that school is a possibility. But there's also the possibility of removing them from the SFID as well.
And I recall, I'm going to piggyback on your question to make a comment. Are you okay with that? Sorry, Pete. If I recall, if we removed Placer 1, that brought down attendance by about 500, which then put West Park about 3,500, and that was sort of in the range of what?
Yeah, and that's an area that I was going to talk about at a future board meeting, really looking at some of those scenarios, not looking at the totality of attendance boundaries, but some of those little items like the Oakmont Island and potentially Placer 1, if the board wanted to consider rezoning those, what that would look like. But the rough numbers are, and it changes year to year, but when I looked at 10 years, it was about 500-ish students. So instead of West Park getting to about 4,000, it was about 3,500.
But finishing the school will in essence meet the needs of everyone in that current boundary with the exception of what's undeveloped in Phase 1.
Correct.
And how many, is there a certain zoning that we've already been zoned for at West Park High School? Can we build a 3-story building? Can we build a 4-story building? Can we build more than one building? Is there any limitations we have on that?
Not really. We go through Division of State Architect, and the city of Roseville's involved, but it's really a state architect that we're governed by. I don't think we go above 3-story, but we have obviously 4 other 3-story classroom buildings, so we have the space for a theater and another 3-story classroom building, or it could be a 2-story building, that to give you a rough idea of the spacing. But we do have other issues as far as parking, and our space is limited. We have some areas that are wetlands that we don't really have the ability to build on, so we're kind of limited to what we have space there. But yes, we could build 5-story, I guess.
A 5-story parking garage?
Yeah, we can do anything.
So one question I had for you was, if we take the SBID money now and we say, okay, we're ready to go on West Park High School for any number of reasons, will that push back any timing just from manpower for the Oakmont High School? Even if the money isn't taking from Oakmont High School, does it take the focus from Oakmont High School with Scott? Is he just focused on West Park, and does that push back Oakmont High School?
I don't believe so. Both projects, I've talked to Scott about the potential of starting the design of both projects potentially this summer. And he feels that, especially with this project being done, Roseville will have started construction. He's usually able to kind of handle that level. I mean, it's a lot of work, but the design, whether we're building $20 million or $50 million worth at West Park, it's kind of a similar amount of workload. With building a classroom and a theater, as well as at Oakmont, the pool. I think the key for him is, is doing a master plan, and really, like, even if we're only able to do the pool for phase 1, having that conversation of the entire master plan at Oakmont High School, so we're not making certain decisions that impact other decisions, and kind of making sure we have the totality of the plan designed. So Scott does have the capacity to do both projects.
I like ability, that's a good word.
I mean, and it's probably mostly because Scott is maybe superhuman, because he does a lot of work, so. The average Joe, no pun intended out there, probably maybe couldn't do those projects at the same time, but Scott Davis is good.
And this is totally random, so if you don't know, that's fine, but do you know how construction costs how they've increased over the years? Do you have a percentage of construction costs go up by this percentage every year?
It always goes up, that I will say. Sometimes more than others, but it varies depending on, one of the things I will say, the larger the project, I think the better rates we get, the better deal, because it's a more attractive project, there's more bidders. When we have those smaller projects, it becomes a little harder to find a competitive people bidding on that project. So usually projects of these size, when you're talking 20, 30, $40 million, they're pretty attractive, and so we get pretty good rates, but typically we've been looking at 5 to 10% is a good year, I would say. So we've had years that the cost of construction has been much higher than that. So we kind of plan in at least 5 to 10% construction cost increases. And a lot of that's just the cost of labor, cost of materials, but certain things like, certain trades have gone up much higher than that.
Thank you. That's
So,
all my questions.
That does bring up just another point I want to bring up, is just the benefit of getting this much money and doing this bigger project is, whatever we do, it's only going to get more expensive the longer we wait. And we still, even though interest rates are higher than they have been, they still, for municipal bonds like these, are pretty low interest rates. So we're looking at, I think it was 4.8 or something around there is kind of what we estimate. And we have good bond people who are able to kind of get us really good rates that are typically lower than the cost of construction increases. So if you think about it from like a value of money, if construction is going up 4 or 10% a year, but our interest rate is only 4%, we're kind of doing a little bit better in that regard.
Yeah, And that kind of dovetailed off what we were talking last time about some of these things we can't really wait. We need to get moving, we're gonna run out of space. Oakmont needs some serious things that, you know, we've been dealing with for a while. There's emergency around the pool. So when we're kind of looking at this, and also, you know, you shared the, about bonding capacity and how we're gonna need to get a waiver out there. If we can't get a waiver, it'd probably be, it would say ideal to get that this year and not get a waiver. So that's,
Well, so no, we already have the waiver, it just expires at the end
Right.
of this December. And so
before it expires.
yeah, so we could, if we issue all 51 million, we don't have to worry about the waiver because we've done it. But if we do a lesser amount, whenever we went for another issuance in the future, we would need to get a waiver. And it's not, as Chris said, it's pretty routine, but there are some steps. We'd have to get board resolutions passed. We have to talk with the unions. There are some hoops to jump through, but it's not the end of the world.
Well, to me, it's just another thing that we would
Yeah.
have to do administratively.
Yeah.
The other thing that spoke out to me was the more SFIT we use for West Park, the more we can get for Oakmont.
Yep.
And I think that's a win-win. The money's just sitting there, I think inflation, where everything's going, our value of our money is more than it's gonna be. So, anyways, I so appreciate the information, and I'm favoring moving things quickly, or as quickly as reasonably we can.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let me ask one more question, Joe.
Sure.
I'm very conservative financially, and I think you are too, and we
Yes.
have been a support.
Mhm.
And what's your recommendation, knowing that we want to be conservative? Well, I'm not speaking for anybody else, but not put ourselves at a huge risk. What do you think would be a reasonable, how high could we go and still stay within that conservative, safer range?
To be honest, and I am concerned, I feel pretty comfortable with the 50 million. I put myself in the shoes, and I lived out in West Park for 7 or 8 years. I would rather pay to get the school done, finished, but it's only gonna cost more. And is it possible that it gets above the $38? Sure. To me, if let's say I had $1 million house out there, we're talking about $386 a year. Okay, maybe it's $410 a year. To me, I would rather, let's get that school finished and done. And I'm not worried about that couple extra bucks. And that, it probably would just be temporary, right? We'd be above, and then more houses get built, and then we're back below 38. They've had a number of years, as you see here, that it's been below 38. You know, in 2019-20, it was $25. So that would be, I feel pretty comfortable with that. Again, I'm talking too much today. If that really is a concern for the board, on my third one, I'm gonna get a wreck.
You're cut off.
If that is a concern for the board, and the board is, we absolutely can't get above $38, and said, no matter what, you know, stay at a $38, I would feel comfortable doing more of that. Maybe a $30 to $40 million issuance, I would still feel comfortable we could get West Park pretty much complete and be able to do a lot of the stuff at Oakmont. But then the other side of it is just timing and ease, just finish it. So that's my
Thanks.
recommendation, but, you know, as I showed different scenarios, I'm fine with scenario one, where the, you know, I will make anything work, whatever the board directs.
Pete's ready for comments.
Yes. I will just say it's not a win-win if you live in the SFIT. And so, you know, this district took an approach a number of years ago to create an SFIT by an attendance area of one school, which is not a typical way of doing that. And if we could go to slide number 8, please. I think it's important to look, when you look at, oh, sorry, I guess I had my numbers wrong. Interesting, the one on, that's the one I want, 9. On our packet, it's 8, but on this one, it's 9. I think it's important as you look at this slide, you have to realize that if you live in the SFID, you pay 327% more taxes to the school district than someone who lives across the street outside of the SFIT. And because when you look at this chart for 2025, it's what, about, I think it's at $16.15, but if you're in the SFID, it's $52.81. I know it seems cheap, but it adds up, because you have to remember that those developer fees that fill out a big old chunk of that spreadsheet, those developer fees are coming from Westmark, from the SFID area. And so every home that has been built in our district compared to the other districts at a price of $50,000 to $75,000 more because of all the associated costs. I know this because my sister-in-law, when she bought her house, she doesn't have kids, she has no plans on having kids. She specifically shopped to get in the center school district so she could get a house that was significantly cheaper for the same amount of money. And if we can now go to the map of the attendance areas, when you look at this area, you know, we represent, in this entire colored area, we represent about 195,000 people. And of those 195,000 people, they all paid, including the people in West Park, pay the bonds for all the other high schools. We have 6 comprehensive high schools, 5 of them not in the SFID. We have the cost of the Independence, Adelante, adult school, any improvements that have been done there. We have this building here that's not in the SFID. Everybody in the district has shared those costs. And that's what typically happens in school districts across the United States. But then there was this issue of an attendance boundary selected for an SFID that I always had an issue with from a taxpayer perspective, because now you have these people who live in the SFID paying for their own school while they're paying for all the other schools throughout the area. And obviously none of us were here when that decision was made, but it was sort of without regard to the stacking of those other bonds and the developer fees and all those other things that go out there. And now we're stuck in an area, a time where we're looking at these attendance issues and we're saying, if everybody who's paying the tax goes to the building that they're paying for, we can't accommodate them in 5 years. So we have to decide, are we going to change the attendance boundaries before houses are built? And we're going to tell people, thanks for your contribution, but just know before you sign on the dotted line, you're not going to go to the school that you're paying for. And we created sort of this unevenness of taxes across the district. And so, while I'm in favor of changing the SFID boundaries, I'm not in favor of changing the SFID boundaries to get rid of the future tax growth that we need to build up. It's kind of a catch-22. We're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We don't have the room to take these folks' kids when they come in, but we need their tax money to accomplish our overall goals because of this decision that was literally made decades ago. Personally, I have been talking to Joe for over 4 years. I think we even had this discussion before the 2016 election when you and I and a couple superintendents back had breakfast talking over this. I really think if we really want to be fair, we want to have the money to accommodate our students across the district, because we are going to have gentrification in other parts of the city that are going to increase attendance. Maybe not by the 10-year mark that we're seeing in our demographic studies, but that is going to happen. We know what happens. You can look at different cities across the state and see how these patterns go with generational growth. But I firmly believe that when we went out for, I think it was Measure D in 2016, we should have explored, and I think we still should explore, should we not be thinking about refinancing the entire SFID across the entire district so that everybody who uses our schools, and we have all these inter-district transfers that we have talked about, so that everybody who is in our boundaries pays for everything in our boundaries versus having a class of taxpayers that pay for some and a class of taxpayers that pay for some and then some on top of it. And when you look at that delta, the 327% delta, if that dollar amount was spread across the assessed value of the entire district in a bond issuance, that dollar amount would be very small. And so I know it's complicated, but if we're gonna go through the heartburn and the legal expense and everything we need to do to change an SFID boundary, I would much rather look at us saying, okay, what do we have to do on a district-wide level so that we can equalize our tax rates across the district? And that means taking that money to pay off the SFID and let the SFID sit there with its boundaries and no debt to service, so therefore there's no fees due, and we have an SFID on a map only. I would much rather do that. I think it's the fair way to do things. It's the fair, I just never thought that the way this was set up was fair. And I always knew that we were gonna have a problem as we grow. And I think we have beat our projections every time our demographer has said something, we have beat those projections. And you can see that reflected in the growth of the assessed values. I guarantee you that's far above what was projected. I think if you take the demographic studies, we have more students, significantly more than what the demographers planned. And we're gonna continue to see this. So we may do a little patch, but it's gonna be a patch. We're gonna have the problem. And then we're gonna say, okay, so now, what families have been paying the SFID and had their buildings for 10 years, are we gonna now say you're not in the district, or you're not in the attendance area? And I think it's a real concern. And I've always had a heartburn with the amount of transfers we've allowed in to West Park when we had a covenant with the taxpayers that we're gonna establish an SFID and it's gonna be attendance area, but then we haven't even followed through with that. So I know I've been rambling a long time, but this is something that really bugs me from a taxpayer perspective. Full disclosure, although I live out there, because this is the district that this is actually almost the exact district boundaries for my trustee area. But it's significant. I've been to so many community meetings with people complaining, not just about the SFID, but we have to understand that there's also, between Melrose and community facility districts, there's 3 more taxing entities that sit on top of that as well. And we have to think about the burden we're putting on the taxpayers, whether it's the taxpayers of the entire district or the taxpayers of the section. So, step off my soapbox, but I just think it's something we should all be thinking about as we make these decisions, because they're all entangled together. Thanks.
Right. Any other comments based off that comment? So,
I'll let you go.
oh no, I was just going to pose a question then. So, in that scenario, hypothetically, what is your thoughts then around the more immediate needs? Let's just take Oakmont, for example. Regardless of any of those things that you just mentioned, they still need a pool. And so what do you foresee as the order in which we would approach? Or anyone?
Well, I do think, you all know, all my kids went to Oakmont, and I think we've underinvested in Oakmont for a long time. And I think we have a lot of making up to do in that area, and I think all the families and the students that attend Oakmont now and in the future deserve that. But I really think we need to decide what we're gonna do philosophically first. Because if, at least with the SFID dollars, if we have to go out and make changes, it's a complicated process. We need to know if we're just gonna make the change from the suggestion that we've heard, or put our efforts towards looking at how much it would cost and what the bond requirements would be to do a valid bond measure for the entire district. So we'd have to do that analysis. And we'd have to figure out what direction, I know what direction I want to go, but I know I also know you don't all think the exact same way I do. So where do we end up as a board I think answering those philosophical questions have to come first, and then figuring out the sequence of the projects. As Joe knows, I've been harping on this for years. It's just, we just gotta figure it out.
Thoughts? So philosophically, I think when you buy a house, there's an expectation of an understanding, okay, I remember when I bought my house, we looked, do we have Melrose? Do we not? And you make a decision. What you want in your neighborhood, what you're willing to spend. You look at, okay, what districts, what school districts you're in, then you have an expectation, this is where I'm going. And I hate taxes, so I feel for you, I really do. But when I look at Measure A maps with 91.6 people agreeing to pay this, and
There are only 12 property owners at that time, so.
okay, well. So literally you're telling me 12 people voted? Okay, well that's interesting, but when, okay, I'll admit, that's interesting. But when everyone purchased that home in that area, they understood that this is what they're buying into. So while I have compassion for the taxes, I also feel like, well, that was due diligence in purchasing a home. And so to announce that now people, after living there, they feel like it's unfair, and so now they need to spread those taxes to people who did their own due diligence when they were buying their home in a different area in Roseville, and saying, sorry, I have a hard time with that philosophically. So.
You know, I agree, if we had the money and built a facility that would accommodate the entire area, but we don't. And I would agree if we had been, for all the years that West Park's been open, holding up to our end of the covenant that if you don't pay the investment, you're not going to attend the school, because that was a pretty strong message to the community.
But that was the 12, you mean the 12 people?
And everybody, when we bought our homes, that was part of the discussion. And before the bond went out under the 2016 bond, because the bond was sold to the voters that we need to finish West Park, so we need to do this bond. We had a $30 million need. But to be honest, we bought off the rest of the district with $60-something million of other projects to get people to vote for them, because we knew that if we said we were just asking for the money we needed, we wouldn't be able to get people to do it. So we ended up inflating it. And I know Joe and I, and what was the other superintendent's name? Ron and I went back and forth on this. It's like, we have a $30 million need, or we're gonna pass a $100 million bond. And that was a bone of contention, because now the people who paid the SFIs, paid the impact fees, we're gonna get a school, and they say, okay, well now if you want your school, you have to vote for this bond, not only to do the gap funding, but to also fund those $66 million more for the rest of the school district on top of the other bonds you're still paying. So there was all that.
And you could argue crummy decisions by people that are not here. But going back to the current problem of, and it sounds like you're also upset that we've been allowing people who are not in the SFID to go to West Park. I'm assuming it's because we've had room. My understanding is we aren't allowing a lot of transfers anymore. Mel can probably answer to that, but I know I'm sure you're furiously looking for numbers. You're not on a website doing fun things.
No, really.
It's been very few.
So I'm trying to pull up this transfer data, just looking.
Yes.
So last year West Park had, between all intras and inters, because we've been closed to inters for West Park for a few years. So there was actually a net of -30 for West Park because of transfers.
So they're negative 30 kids left West Park. We haven't accepted inter-districts or intra-districts into West Park for a few years.
Well, the net doesn't really matter. If someone chooses to go somewhere else versus someone coming in who's not paying.
Correct.
To me, that's strikingly different.
But you're saying no one's coming in.
Right, so West Park's been closed to transfers for at least two years. Now going into 25, 26, we're doing transfers right now, closed again. They're not open for any transfers.
Pretty much since I've been complaining.
Good job, Pete.
So just one thing to kind of, I know the focus of tonight was looking at the bond money, the SFID money, and that we're gonna plan and come back with other pieces. I think ultimately if the board decides not to remove that piece and move it to a different district, we still have this bond money that we need to spend. And there's still some urgency associated with that, because as you have lived through projects, it takes a long time to get everything up and running, and time is ticking quickly. So, but I appreciate the comments and definitely a continuing conversation.
Yeah, I think we need to finish West Park.
Yes. Ultimately, it has to get finished. Upgrades need to happen. So I think it's just deciding if we're comfortable with one of these four scenarios. Is there a different scenario that isn't presented that we're more comfortable with?
Well, are we saying, I mean, if we said, okay, yes, we want to choose scenario 4, but then are we still talking about potentially, could his idea potentially still go forward at that point? Or, I mean, if we sell those bonds now, that's just that group, or are you saying we would could still potentially refinance even after approving the rest of the SFID?
Well, I don't think, yeah, we could do something similar post-project, but quite frankly, the leverage to get something done like that after the project's built is zero.
What you're suggesting is spreading the SFID across the entire district. Does that require a vote
It
from the public?
it would take a
So
vote.
now we have to go out to the public.
I gotta say,
Oh,
I'm not,
do you want to answer that?
I
Two batteries per meeting, is it?
Yeah, I know. So maybe I'll break them in my pocket, I guess. Just a couple points that we were just chatting about, just want to make. So the potential bond vote, the earliest we could be considering would be 2026. But realistically, that election, 2026 or 2028, typically you tie with a general election. So just want to make sure that was there. And then as far as on my end, if the board wants to give me any direction, I would be looking at, go for the full 51, or we're okay with you going up to 30 million, or giving me direction. That would ultimately come back to the board. So that's what I'd be looking for tonight is, if the board wants to take action, would be to give me that direction. I think I answered the question though about the bond election. That could be potentially done separate, but I know Pete has his point that any leverage is potentially gone for. Yeah. And when we did do the bond measure D, it was $96 million, so it was $30 million towards West Park. And we did have other needs at other projects, at other school sites, but yeah, we did try to make sure that everybody's paying for it, that everybody got a benefit at each high school. So one example would be the stadium snack bars. That was paid with Measure D. Every school got one of those. Granite Bay got a swimming pool. Roseville got the new gymnasium. We did projects at Oaklawn and West Woodbury. Some of them weren't as sexy. They were roofing projects or other repairs, but those were some of the projects that were.
So Joe, I noticed that if we were taking the full 50, you have just on your spreadsheet an assumption that then you're spending 65 for West Park.
That would be up to the board later. I would then.
But was that your assumption? That's what you're estimating?
That was me
is
estimating
what
if we
finish
wanted to.
School well.
Yeah, I think if we had somewhere in that, back going to here, I think a theater that what West Park would need would be that 30 to 40, and then classrooms, 20, 25 million. Obviously, we need to hire an architect, and they would help design, and we give them kind of a budget. But in my, experience with building other things, I think we have plenty of money to finish West Park, around that 60, 65 million.
And if we give you the go-ahead to do the bond issuance tonight, we still can decide what order we're doing things in, and we're not agreeing, we're just saying we would go ahead and.
Yeah, my next steps would be, we have the other topics we've talked about that would need to come back, but as far as the buildings go, it would be working with Chris, and she'd start crunching the numbers, and really, that would eventually be a resolution to the board of, here's the details of the bonds, what we're looking to sell, how much it's gonna, all the specifics. And then on the facility side, I would start working with Scott, architects, and the money, and saying, okay, getting those budgets and ideas and coming to the board and saying, okay, seeking authorization to begin design at Oakmont and at West Park, and kind of have that rough idea. We'd look a little bit more towards the numbers and say, okay, we're asking for a $50 million project at Oakmont, and some of these are the priorities, but obviously we would start working with an architect, an expert, who would help us get our best bang for our buck in that project. So that would be my goal. Either way, my goal was to start both designs by the summer. And so I'd want to start, depending on the direction from the board tonight, I would start looking with Scott on potential architects that we know could work with that would come back to the board for approval, along with the budget.
Well, I think we need to, I would make a motion that we approve scenario 4. Oh, direction. I would give the direction that we move ahead with scenario 4. We need to build out West Park. The longer that we wait, the more expensive it will become. My biggest concern, as I've voiced in the past, is I do not want Oakmont High School to be pushed back because of this. And so I think we need to make sure that they are prioritized as well. But it seems from everything you presented, most likely the taxes aren't going to go up for anybody out there. I mean, they're not going to go above, most likely not above 38, which they're already paying now. And I do have to agree with Marla, that was part of, they know that, build as buying out there. So I would say, I would give the direction, go ahead with scenario number 4.
Yeah, I feel, I resonate with a lot of what you're saying, Pete. I think I just worry about the timeline. Like, if we're looking at changing things on a ballot in 2026, and then by then our board looks different, and then by then we're looking at another year or 2 to be able to start, and the needs are urgent, I feel like, at least on the Oakmont and the West Park needs. So I don't want to be, I don't remember who said the board 20 years ago that made bad decisions, right? I don't want to be that board.
I think I said that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Whoever that board was back then, we don't want to be that board who's kicking the can down the road on this. And so I do feel like, I agree with you. I feel comfortable with number 4. And then we circle back to the, line or change policy around transfers, that sort of thing. So if you don't need a vote, then what?
I'm looking for direction, and just kind of because and we would still work the numbers, right? If I feel that the consensus is, if you feel like you can get the full 50, get it. Obviously, if interest rates start going higher and Chris starts working on the numbers, and it's now we're having to project higher growth than we feel comfortable with, then I may not come back and say 51. I may say, I can only fit 40. I think she's pretty good, knows what's coming, and I think pretty comfortable. So before I brought something to the board, I wanted to make sure everybody was comfortable with it, and so.
Well, then I make a motion for you to investigate.
It's direction, it's
It's direction, okay.
So-
Then we'll be on.
Yeah, definitely concur, and I've been talking all night about, the urgency, so definitely concur, and I also, address Oakmont's needs. The more the scenario 4 gives us the most light towards Oakmont too, so I think that part's important.
Yeah, and hearing that from the board too, I can make sure that as I work with Scott, that we're not necessarily trying to slow down West Park, but it is a priority to make sure that the Oakmont project is not being delayed, that it is, we want to get the pool and everything started ASAP.
If I could just make one last comment, and I'd also love to hear from our students down at the end, but starting these wheels in motion without having a decision on how we're gonna handle the capacity, I do not think is wise. I think we need to figure out what we're gonna do with that upper left-hand corner that's not developed, because if we go this direction, and we need to know for our projection, they need to know, so that we need to know on the projections what that capacity is going to be with or without those homes. And going down that path and committing taxpayers to something and having people buy homes with expectations, with us failing to provide capacity, or building capacity but destroying the 2-lane roads that unfoolishly were built, or foolishly were built and unfoolishly didn't consider how many cars we could take 4,000 kids to school. We need to figure that out. Because again, not necessarily germane to this subject, but we do have potential 4,000 attendance high school next to a 1,800 attendance middle school within literally 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet, right down the street from an overcapacity elementary school, and they all share the same 2-lane road, Bob Doyle, to get people there. And that's a concern. So we have to accelerate our decision on the other, because if we execute one without dealing with the other, I think we're just gonna have a big cluster.
Can I ask a question, Pete, a question, because you brought that up before about 2-lane road. Do you bring it up because you feel like maybe West Park shouldn't have the capacity of, let's say, 3,500, and you think that we should be shifting? And I'm just wondering what your motives, because how do you fix a 2-lane road when you can't?
Well, I'm wondering out loud, what the heck the specific planning thought process was, because you can see these big campuses right next to each other, and maybe the thought of, we should at least have a 3-lane road so we have a turning lane. But how are we gonna get these families in and out? And moving the start times didn't really help that much. And the cut-through traffic in the neighborhoods is getting worse, and it's inconvenient for parents to have to leave earlier to get their kids to school. You've got just this cluster of issues around it. And having been involved in city planning, how could they not have thought of that? Because the capacity, they knew how many homes they were gonna build. They have the numbers, but we underplanned for school facilities. Why, when the map was empty and nobody owned any property, why didn't they pick a lot that was on Fittyman or Blue Oaks or Pleasant Grove, where you had the traffic capacity to deal with it? And those things just weren't, for whatever reasons, weren't done. And we're stuck with it. So we also have to keep asking, are we gonna keep building and filling, knowing that we're compounding problems, and it just gets worse over time? So that's why.
So for instance, put a 3-story building on,
Yeah, I mean,
literally, like, is that what you're, back in your mind, you're thinking, we just need to build?
No,
I'm just throwing it out there.
I don't, honestly, I don't know what the
I don't know how to
answer
help you.
is. It's just,
I'm
building
sorry,
capacity, well, building capacity at Wood Creek won't do anything because we have an SFIT attendance boundary. So we can't fix it because we have a structural impediment to fixing it. So it's kind of what were they thinking times 2 maybe, or times 3. I don't have the answer, I just know it's my job to bring the concerns up so that we're talking about it, so we go down a path knowing what we're getting people into. Because what if Placer 1 ends up building twice as many houses as they say, And what if people have families my size, and every family's popping out 5 to 7 kids? That changes the demographic numbers, you know, and those are things that are real things that we've been living that, because they weren't counting on as many multiple children families as we have. The demographers use the 1.75 factor or something, and it doesn't necessarily play out in our community. And those are things we know demographers have been wrong historically. We know the traffic counts have been off historically. So I'm just asking that we are thinking about these things so we know what we're getting ourselves into, and we look. Is there an option to do something with the SFID? Yes or no? Can we spread it across the district? Yes or no? Can we move attendance boundaries and have to have the conversation with people? Sorry, we thought we could do it, but we can't do what we promised because it's going to cause these other 10 problems. I just want to make sure that we are driving forward with the headlights fully on, and that we've thought through them all, so that at least 10 years from now, when they're complaining about us, we'll have a record of why we did what we did.
I just wanted to point one thing out, and I think someone that we can still move forward, and my plan had always been to come back, probably the next board meeting or one after, to talk about. So it's not like we're pushing that out, because there's a lot of topics, and it's kind of hard to do them all at once. I understand what Pete's saying, is like they all kind of impact each other, but also trying to find a way to chunk them in those decisions. So part of my next plan, if the board is comfortable, is not only potentially moving forward this, but coming back to the board, looking at some of those potential attendance boundaries, and I would hope to do that within a month so that the board can consider those options, kind of along the same time we're doing these other items.
I mean, I say that Pete has a valid point with the traffic. Granite Bay has, the traffic is back to the two one lanes going opposite directions, so I feel like that is a valid point. If you keep expanding West Park and you don't have the capacity for juniors and seniors and sometimes sophomores that can drive, and parking and parents dealing with the other schools, I do feel like that is a valid concern that you have, just as a student point of view. You know, if I don't leave my house by a certain time in the morning, I know I'm gonna get in traffic, and then someone might take my spot that I paid for, so that's not the end of the world, but many seniors think that. So I think that is valid, but I do understand not wanting to push back Oakmont and continuing the support of them and modernizing it, because I know Oakmont's one of the older schools in the district. So it is kind of a sticky situation, but I feel like all sides have very valid points.
For me, I definitely think like going to Roseville, which has been around for over 100 years, it's frustrating that like our tennis team still has to leave our school in order to practice, and our dive team has to go to other schools to practice, and then we watch schools like West Park get built and they have brand new tennis courts and a brand new pool. So I definitely feel for Oakmont in that way, that like they shouldn't necessarily have to be pushed back just because another nicer school is getting, you know, built. But I also think that West Park is a priority and it should be built fast. I just feel bad for Oakmont with it, they keep getting from the side, because I know those schools had the same issues.
Yeah, so Joe, if they give you direction, let's say it's scenario 4, what would be the March 11th board meeting that you'd be bringing it back to them?
So, and Kristen, I don't think we'll be ready to do the bond specifics right away. That's probably another month or 2 away before that will be ready, is that right? And so the next bond, more detailed, what that looks like, that's a couple months away, but in March, I would be bringing scenarios of, we talked about Oakmont Island, the little HP property, as well as Placer 1. If the board wanted to rezone those as short-term measures, but this is not the long-term boundaries, what that would look like. Over, you know, from our demographer, which is their estimates, but they're our best guess, that roughly 500 number, Marla, we talked about, what that looks like. Let's say we talked about Roseville High School. So if Placer 1's going to Roseville, what does Roseville now look like over the next 10 years? And so I would plan on bringing those 2 scenarios and showing the board what those look like. and seeing if the board wants to entertain those or something different. I could come back and say, what if we put Placer 1 to Granite Bay, or, you know, but my goal with, I know we talked about Oakmont Island potentially going to Wood Creek, and then Placer 1 potentially going to Roseville. So I would want to, my plan is to present what that looks like based on the demographic projections.
And maybe part of all this, can we have an overview of how the transfers work because I think that's also a factor in all of this, not just the territories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So does that help? So do you have what you need for right now?
So,
And then, I mean, our plan is to continue probably every meeting having some chunk of this. And so based on how March 11th goes, we always have that second meeting in March where we could possibly just do a workshop or a one agenda item to dive in further depending on how the discussion goes at the next meeting. So just kind of chunking it each way.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Joe.
Moving on, staff reports.
Got one more.
Yeah.
8.1.
Yep, 8.1. Staff
All right, good evening, trustees. We're gonna make this quick and painless. This evening, we are here to present to you our mid-year LCAP update as per Education Code. You have in front of you Dr. Gandhi, our Director 2 of State and Federal Programs, as well as I will share some of the introductory remarks and then turn over to Dr. Gandhi. As you all know, our LCAP is a joint effort of multiple departments, including Business Services, Joe's Department, Education Services, with regards to the support of programs, and then of course, Dr. Dobson's department with regards to the Student Services portion of LCAP. And as you also know, LCAP primarily exists to support unduplicated student body groups. As I just shared quickly, per SB 114, which has been codified into Education Code, we do need to bring forward in front of you an LCAP mid-year update before the end of February. Thus the reason for us here this evening. In alignment with your board expectations, our LCAP is in alignment with your board expectation 1, 2, and 3 around preparing all of our students to be life, college, and career ready, as well as ensuring that we are engaging in partnership with our families and communities, and of course remaining, utilizing effective governance, including remaining transparent and accountable to both you and our community. And so at this point, Dr. Gandhi will do a brief overview of our goals.
Well, I hope to not use 3 of these tonight. I think it's on, right? No. Okay. So thank you for giving me the opportunity tonight to present on our LCAP. First, what I actually wanted to start with is to just acknowledge the work that is being done. It is a collaborative effort between our special education department, our student services department, our ed services, all of our sites, our students as well, and all of our administrative teams. So really, the work that I'm sharing today is truly, I'm just the messenger. It really is a collaborative effort. Also, in your report, you already have the data in front of you with the metrics and the percentages of all of our subgroups. So my hope tonight is to just highlight a few quick action items that we have been doing and to just celebrate some of the wins that we had. So our first goal is we want students to be college and career ready. And so some of the things that we're doing with that is we've been working really hard to recruit and get access to all of our AP, IE, and DE students. We've been working really hard with all of our different groups to ensure that everyone has access. We've also been doing a really good job in expanding our DE program as well. One of the other things that we've been working really hard is providing more access to our students in seal of literacy. Our second goal is around closing the achievement gap. And so you will see that a lot of the work that we've been doing is around professional development. So we've been providing a lot of professional development within all of our content areas. We've been providing support for our AL students via professional development there as well, making sure that we're compliant in all of our title programs. We've also been ensuring that our credit deficient students graduate on time by providing them opportunities for credit recovery. We've also been working really hard with our co-teaching initiative with our special education department and our gen ed teachers. And so as you can see, we're busy. We're doing a lot of work, and it's good work. Goal 3 is really around making sure that we're expanding our supports for our students and ensuring that we have parent involvement. And so some of the work that we're doing there is we follow our culture of care model that I'm sure that you're already aware about. And so in that work, what we're doing is we really want to make sure that our students are connected to our community and to our school. We're also offering different training initiatives as well through different behavioral threat assessments, as Ms. Riegel had talked about last week as well. Goal 4 is really specific for Adelante High School because it is an equity multiplier school. So the reason that Adelante High School is an equity multiplier school is because they have a high SED population and non-stability rate. And so whenever you have that, you have to have an additional goal. And so that's why we have goal 4. And so some of the work that's been happening in Adelante is we've been utilizing our instructional coach to provide and support and implement PBL, which is project-based learning, and BTC as well. They've been working hard to analyze data and ensure that all of our students do graduate on time. And so in closing, what I really wanted to share is actually some highlights. So graduation rates went up from 92%, which is already awesome, to 94%. We also are continuing to expand our seal of biliteracy by providing more access. Some of our growth areas is in math, and we are addressing that, and we're working really hard through our goal 2. We are committed and continue to be committed to making sure that we are implementing the LCAP with fidelity. And truly the work comes through our teachers, through our counselors, through our staff, and all of our administrators. And it takes a collaborative effort, and we're proud. I think we're making a lot of good growth, and I'm excited to see where we end up at the end of this year. Are there any questions that I can answer for you?
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
That was awesome. Okay, any staff comments? No? All right.
So, can I just go back? I'm sorry.
Vaccines? Sure.
Sorry. Just, and I think this is answered, but just to make sure, so I don't go home and stew about this, but I'm just curious about the idea of the SFID being shared and then maybe building up Wood Creek High School. Is that something we would, that maybe adding another classroom building at Wood Creek? Did Marla, you said something about that?
I'm joking, but.
Well, I'm just thinking, I'm just wondering, does that have anything to do with what we've directed Joe to do tonight? If we were to, say we did something wild like that.
I mean, anything's a possibility as we go down the road. I mean, that would be determined with those other decisions, with their capacity. I mean, right now, their capacity with their current is 2,400 now. And they've been at that place for many years, up until maybe a couple years ago. So, but I mean, anything's possible when those decisions are made.
I think that was more of a traffic suggestion. I don't know how you fix traffic. I don't know how we fix traffic.
I mean,
Sure.
But yeah, I mean,
it's that same side of Roseville.
Right.
Well, Joe's not here right now, so if you guys want to make any decisions on spending money.
Well, I feel like we need a workshop. How would we work together? Okay, well, then do we have any motions to adjourn? Motion to, Pete has made a motion to adjourn.
I'll
We have a
second.
Marla has seconded. All those in favor? Aye. adjourn. Thank you all for coming. If you need any of your paper signed for school, come on up.
I did. I was their